My name is Liam, this is my real story. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Secret Affairs Exposed. This is where we uncover the hidden and shocking stories of secret love affairs that were never meant to come to light now. Let's dive into today's story. My heart was pounding. I was late, and not just a little late. I was an hour late for the most important dinner of my life, meeting my girlfriend Charlotte's incredibly wealthy parents. Charlotte had warned me a million times. Liam, she'd said. On the phone, this is our one chance. Just remember, you're not a mechanic. You're an automotive specialist, and for goodness sake, wash your hands. I had laughed it off then, but honey, that's what I am. I love what I do. But her words echoed in my head. I had scrubbed my hands with a stiff brush until they were raw, put on my single best suit, and climbed into my lovingly restored pickup truck. The plan was flawless. A leisurely drive, a timely arrival, and a confident smile. It was a beautiful day, perfect for a drive out into the countryside. The sun was warm, and the road ahead was clear, promising a smooth journey. But plans have a way of changing. Halfway there, as the sprawling city gave way to the pristine suburbs, I saw her. A little old lady, standing on the side of the road, looking absolutely helpless next to her beautiful classic car. The hood was up, and a small cloud of smoke was rising from the engine. It's my conscience, my mechanic's heart, wouldn't let me drive past. The car, a magnificent two-toned Rolls-Royce silver cloud, was an absolute work of art, a masterpiece of engineering that deserved respect and attention. I pulled over. Looks like you're in a bit of trouble, ma'am, I said, trying to sound as non-threatening as possible. She explained that her vintage car had just stopped working. Her driver was nowhere to be found. Her face was a mask of aristocratic frustration. I told her I was a mechanic, and her face lit up. It was a simple fix, just a frayed wire on the distributor cap, but it was a messy one. Grease and oil got everywhere, staining my hands and my clean shirt while I worked. She told me stories about her life, her eyes twinkling with a kindness I'd rarely seen in anyone, let alone someone who looked like they owned half the state. When I finally got the car running again, she was so grateful she tried to pay me. I couldn't accept it. Her beaming smile was more than enough. By the time I got back in my truck, my hands were black with grease, and my phone was filled with angry messages from Charlotte. I was over an hour late, and my nice suit was ruined. I knew I was about to face a disaster. The sun, a fiery orange ball, was already beginning to sink below the rolling hills, and the dinner was supposed to have started at 6. I rehearsed my apology in my head, but it sounded flimsy and pathetic, like a cheap excuse a schoolboy would invent. These were not the kind of people who would appreciate the nuances of a broken-down vintage automobile. These were people who, as Charlotte had so carefully explained to me, valued one thing above all else: appearances. And I, with my greasy hands, my dirt-stained suit pants, and my unforgivable tardiness, was about to make the worst first impression in human history. When I arrived at the Prescott Mansion, it was even more impressive than I'd imagined. It was a sprawling estate of stone and brick, surrounded by a perfectly manicured lawn that stretched for acres. I parked my humble, if lovingly restored, pickup truck at the far end of a circular driveway that was already lined with expensive German sedans. I felt like a dinghy tying up next to a fleet of yachts. I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my heart hammering against my ribs. I tried to clean the grease from under my fingernails with a useless paper napkin from the glove box, a futile gesture that only seemed to smear the blackness. This was it. I took a deep, steadying breath, got out of my truck, and began the long, lonely walk to the imposing front door. I rang the bell. The sound echoed deep and sonorous somewhere in the vastness of the house. I waited. After what felt like an eternity, the heavy dark wood door swung open, and there was Charlotte. Her face, which I had last seen on a video call, full of a beautiful, anxious hope, was now a mask of pure, horrified shock. "Liam," she whispered, her eyes wide as they took in my appearance, my disheveled hair, my grease-stained hands, and the dirt on my suit. "Oh my God, what happened to you? You're an hour late." Before I could form an excuse, her parents, George and Catherine, appeared. He was a tall, stern man in a smoking jacket. She was draped in pearls, her face a picture of bored disapproval. They looked at Charlotte's horrified expression, then at my grease-stained hands and rumpled suit. Their cold contempt was palpable. "So," George said, his voice as sharp as a shard of ice. "This is him, the mechanic," I tried to explain. "So sorry, sir. There was an old woman on the road. A car broke down and I had to help her." George held up a hand. "I don't want to hear your excuses, young man. Punctuality is a sign of respect, and you have shown us none." Catherine stepped forward, her eyes raking over my hands. "Charlotte told us you worked with your hands. I see you've made no effort to hide it. How... quaint." I just stood there, speechless. The double-barreled shotgun blast of their snobbery had left me completely disarmed. I had failed. I gave Charlotte a final apologetic look and turned to walk back to my truck, my future with her feeling as distant and as cold as the stars. But then, a sound. The deep, rich rumble of a classic V12 engine. The headlights of a magnificent, two-toned Rolls-Royce swept across the driveway. The car came to a smooth stop behind my truck. My heart, which had been in my shoes, suddenly leaped into my throat. I knew that car. The passenger door opened, and an elegant hand, adorned with a sapphire ring, appeared. Then, the woman I had helped on the side of the road stepped out. "Mother, what are you doing here?" Schlett's mom gasped. The woman, Beatrice, Prescott Charlotte's grandmother, ignored her daughter. Her sharp, intelligent eyes scanned the scene, taking in the shocked faces of her family and my disheveled appearance. A slow, knowing smile spread across her face. "George, Catherine," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You're angry at this young man. You just spent an hour on a roadside fixing my car after your driver got lost. He was late because he's a good person," George sputtered, "but he's a mess. He's a mechanic." Beatrice waved a hand dismissively. "Yeah, mess. This, George, is the mark of a man who isn't afraid of real work. It's a measure of character, something money can't buy." She turned. To me, her smile genuine and warm. "Thank you, young man. You have a rare skill and even rarer kindness. You will join me for dinner." She took my arm, and I walked into the mansion, not as a disgraced mechanic, but as her honored guest. That night, George and Catherine were silenced. I had not been accepted despite who I was. I had been celebrated because of it. And I knew standing there that I had found a family that valued character over everything else. The dinner that followed was the most surreal, the most satisfying, and the most terrifying 90 minutes of my entire life. It was not a meal. It was a performance. A quiet, brutal, and masterfully executed play with Beatrice as the sole director, and her own children as the hapless, humiliated supporting cast. She completely and totally ignored them. Now, for the entire meal, her focus was a laser beam directed only at me. She did not ask me about my income, or my family, or my future financial prospects. She asked me about me. "So, Liam," she began, after the butler had poured us both a deep ruby red wine, "a 1960s Silver Cloud, a magnificent machine, but a notoriously temperamental one. The fuel pump, I'm told, is a nightmare. What? What's the secret to keeping the pressure consistent?" So I told her. I spoke of my passion, of my craft. I talked about the elegant simplicity of a carburetor, the lost art of hand-tooling a custom part, the unique satisfaction of bringing a beautiful, forgotten old engine back to life. I spoke not as a greasy mechanic, but as an artisan, a craftsman, a man who truly loved his work. And she listened, her sharp, intelligent eyes never leaving my face, asking smart, insightful questions, her interest genuine and absolute. At one point, George, my future father-in-law, clearly unable to bear the irrelevance any longer, tried to interject. "Speaking of investments, Mother," he began, his voice a little too loud. "The market for pre-war classics is showing a significant downturn." Beatrice cut him off with a cool, dismissive wave of her hand. "George, please," she said without even looking at him. "We are discussing things of actual, tangible value tonight, not your imaginary numbers on a screen. Liam is a man who builds things, a concept I fear is becoming quite foreign to this family." The verbal slap was so sharp, so precise. that George physically flinched and retreated into a sullen, resentful silence for the rest of the meal. Later, Catherine, my future mother-in-law, made a desperate attempt to regain some ground. "The duck is simply divine, isn't it, Mother? I had the chef flown in from New York." Beatrice took a delicate bite, chewed thoughtfully, and then looked at me. "It's quite good," she conceded. "But you know, Liam, a well-tuned engine, an engine that has been cared for and brought back from the brink by a skilled hand, that is a far more satisfying thing than any fancy meal. Don't you agree?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face as I finally understood the game she was playing. "I most certainly do." And so it went. For the entire dinner, I was the celebrated guest, the valued expert, and they, in their own magnificent home, were the audience. Forced to sit in silence and watch as the matriarch of their family celebrated the very man they had tried so cruelly to reject. Charlotte, across the table, just watched me. Her face full of a love and a pride so profound it made my own heart ache with a happy, brilliant light. She was seeing the man she fell in love with, not just accepted, but championed. As the evening finally came to a close, and the butler, Mr. Gable, served coffee, Beatrice made her final decisive move. She looked down the long table at her silent, humiliated children, and then at Charlotte and me. "It has been a very long time," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an immense weight, "since I have had a conversation of such substance and integrity at this table. It gives an old woman hope for the future of this family." She then turned to me, a new, sharp, businesslike glint in her eyes. "Liam," she said, "my late husband, Charlotte's grandfather, was a passionate collector of classic automobiles. His collection, which includes several priceless, one-of-a-kind vehicles, has been sitting in a climate-controlled garage on this property, untouched and slowly decaying for nearly 20 years. No one in this family has the skill or the interest to care for them." She leaned forward, her expression now one of a CEO making a formal offer. "I believe," she said, a triumphant smile on her face, "that I have just found a new project for you. We will discuss the generous terms of your new role as the official curator of the Prescott Automobile Collection tomorrow morning." What? My own jaw, I am not ashamed to say, dropped. George and Catherine just stared, their faces a pale, horrified canvas of disbelief. She hadn't just approved of me. She hadn't just welcomed me into the family. She had just given me a job, a purpose within their own world, and the keys to a priceless piece of their history. The greasy mechanic they had tried to throw out of their house had just been put in charge of the family jewels. The silence in the grand dining room following Beatrice Prescott's announcement was a thing of beauty. It was a silence-filled not with tension, but with the deafening sound of my in-laws' world being turned completely and irrevocably upside down. I looked across the table at my girlfriend, Charlotte. The look of pure, radiant, and triumphant love on her face was a sight I would cherish for the rest of my life. She wasn't just happy for me, she was vindicated. The man she loved, the man her parents had deemed a dirty, unpresentable commoner, had just been knighted by the Queen herself. My future father-in-law. George looked as though he had been physically struck. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. My future mother-in-law, Catherine, was a statue of pure, pale horror, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. They had lost in their own home, at their own table. They had been utterly and completely outmaneuvered. Their judgment had been judged and found wanting. I finally found my voice, a humble and slightly shaky thing. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say. That is an incredibly generous offer. I would be honored." "Nonsense," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand, though her eyes were twinkling with a fierce delight. "It is not a generous offer, Liam. It is a practical one. I am saving a priceless piece of my late husband's history from slowly turning to dust at the hands of people who see it only as a number in a ledger. You, I can tell, see the soul in the machinery. That is a skill that cannot be bought." Charlotte and I were finally preparing to leave hours later. After a long and wonderful conversation with Beatrice about the glories of the 1930s Duesenberg engine, my in-laws made one last desperate stand. They cornered Beatrice in the grand foyer. "Mother, you cannot be serious," Catherine hissed, her voice a low, furious whisper. "You are not actually planning to give this grease monkey access to Father's collection? It's a priceless piece of our family's heritage." Beatrice turned, and the warm, grandmotherly woman I had been speaking to all evening vanished, replaced by a figure of such cold, aristocratic authority that even I took an involuntary step back.
"Catherine,"
she said, her voice like ice, "let me be perfectly clear. This family's heritage is not in its cars or its houses or its stock portfolios. This family's heritage is supposed to be in its character. Quality this young man has displayed in abundance, and a quality you and your husband," she gave a withering glance at George, "have shown a shocking lack of tonight. Liam has my complete and total confidence. He is a man of skill, decency, and kindness. He is a welcome and much-needed addition to this family. You will show him the respect he has earned. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Mother," Catherine whispered, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the floor. Beatrice then smiled at me again. "Mr. Gable will give you the keys to the west garage in the morning, Liam," she said. "Have fun." The months that followed were a quiet revolution. Our wedding was a beautiful, joyful affair. My in-laws were there, their smiles strained, but their behavior impeccably polite. They were terrified of Beatrice, and it showed. The day after our honeymoon, I walked into the fabled west garage for the first time with Charlotte at my side. It was a car lover's heaven, a dusty, silent cathedral of automotive greatness. There were pre-war Bugattis, classic Ferraris, ancient, magnificent American muscle cars. It was a lifetime of work, a project of pure joy. And it was now my responsibility, my purpose. I never had to pretend to be a man of automotive management again. In fact, Beatrice insisted that I invite the in-laws to the garage to walk them through my restoration work, to explain the intricate mechanics of a carburetor, to let them see me in my element, my hands covered in the honest, noble grease of my trade. It was her own quiet, sustained, and brilliant form of revenge on my behalf. One evening, months later, Charlotte and I took one of the restored cars, beautiful 1965 Jaguar E-Type, for a drive through the countryside. The sun was setting, the air was cool, and my beautiful wife was sitting beside me, a look of pure, happy contentment on her face. I thought back to that first terrible night, to the dread and the fear I had felt on my way to meet her parents. I had been so ready to hide who I was, to pretend to be someone more respectable, to win their approval. And yet it was the one simple, authentic act of kindness, the act of a mechanic stopping to help a stranger with her car that had won me everything. My vindication was not in their humiliation, but in the profound, beautiful truth of that moment. I had not been accepted in spite of who I was. I had been welcomed, celebrated, and ultimately triumphant because of it. I had been true to myself. And in doing so, had found a new and far better family, grease stains and all, secret affairs exposed.